Quo Vadis, Malaysia. The Latin phrase Quo Vadis means where are you going? And so, where are you going, Malaysia? I'm beginning this series of conversations with top personalities concerning politics, concerning policy, concerning identity, or what it is to be a true Malaysian. My first guest is the Honorable former Prime Minister of Malaysia, the 4th and the 7th, Tun Dr Mahathir Mohamad. I am so thankful that I have this opportunity as a doctor to speak to another doctor. But this one was different because it was challenging, it was overwhelming, because he is 98 years old and he will be 98 on the 10th of July this year, 2023. And so my conversation is all about his journey and my journey as a doctor, my service in the armed forces, and what I went through. Both of us are not only doctors but patients. Both have had open heart surgery. Both know what it is to have our hearts stopped. Both of us know what it is to have death knocking at the door. So I'm deeply pleased that Tun Dr Mahathir sat for 1.5 hours in front of me, patiently listening to my sharing of heart, and I listened to his heart, and I hope you will enjoy this first conversation that I've had with the first of these series with Tun Dr Mahathir Mohamad. Enjoy. Welcome everyone to HEARTtalk, coming to you from Kota Kinabalu in Sabah in Malaysia. You know, HEARTtalk is about heart-to-heart conversations about real issues in life. I'm Dr. Charles Lee. I'm a plastic surgeon for the last 40 years, and it's a joy to have you join me on this morning's discussion. You know, it all begins with the fact that by vision is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see in the present. Now, hope is the currency of the future in the present. But there is blind hope, and blind hope is willful ignorance of our past. Whatever I'm going to talk about is about this from this book, which my guest has authored since 2021. It's called Capturing Hope. The struggle continues for a new Malaysia. So my guest in his teens was a businessman selling goreng pisang, you know, banana fritters in a town and market called Pekan Rabu in Alor-Setar. He did his medical training in the university, right time of Japanese occupation in the 1940s, and subsequently became a physician, but he has always had his pulse on the nation of Malaysia. All the time, for the last 80 over years, even though he is a doctor, but his pulse has been on this nation. That's where his heart is. You know, in 1964, he became into politics and he was my 4th and 7th Prime Minister of Malaysia. It's an honor to have my guest today. He's a father of modern Malaysia. He's also a father of a wonderful family. And kudos to his wife, Tun Dr Siti Hasma. As far you know, she is the cornerstone of the family. A global statesman. In fact, his initials, Dr. M, till today draws worldwide attention and is really of much debate, but he brings excitement. You know, today is Monday, July the 3rd. Next week, same day, July the 10th, he will be 98 years old. And so, please, friends, listen, and I want to quote his words. This is today's world. You can't live on the past, but we are working for our tomorrow, our children. So please join me to welcome the Honorable Tun Dr Mahathir Mohamad. Welcome, Tun.
Thank you.
So Tun, I just want to welcome you once again. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to have this time with you from one doctor. And today we have 2 doctors in the house. And we hope that you will enjoy yourself. But Tun, I want to begin with this proverbial decree which says, where there is no vision, the people will perish. But he who keeps the law, happy is he.
And I found for many years right now that it is better to be happy than to be right all the time. So, in chapter 13, in one paragraph, you say these words, Core Vadis, Malaysia. When I read it, I did not know the meaning. So I had to Google and look, what is the meaning of Core Vadis? And it means, where are you going, Malaysia?
Well, thank you very much. Of course, as a politician, I think about the present and the future. And I use the past in order to understand the trends which is going on in this country and where the trends would lead us to. So when I was Prime Minister, I had the authority to introduce policies and actions that affect the development of the country. One is a Prime Minister. You have access to the administrative machinery of government. And it is the administrative machinery of government that has to administer the country in a way that will bring well-being to the people of the country and to develop the country. So as a Malaysian, I love my country. I want it to be as good as the other developed countries. So in order to do that, I have to figure out what should Malaysia look like in the future. And I decided, together with my many friends, many colleagues, that Malaysia in the future would be a fully developed country. That is the objective. But achieving the objective is a different matter. If you do not know how to achieve the objective, it will not happen. Nothing will happen. But I believe that we have had experience in running the country for me for 22 years. And during that time, I think we were able to improve the standard of living and the development of Malaysia in that 22 years. And we believe that if we continue with the policies and strategies, we would continue to progress, developing the country until after a period of 30 years. That is to say, from 1990 to 2020. During that period, Malaysia would develop and become a developed country. That was what I felt we should do for the country.
As I talk about Core Vadis, Malaysia, the direction where Malaysia is going to go, as a visionary, I want to step back a bit. Because over the last 6 months, you have been traveling to Europe, you've been traveling to East Asia, Japan, Korea, and I want to congratulate you, and it's remarkable, because I'm a visionary myself, that you brought out and mooted this whole idea of a one world government. And I think this is critical time where we should think of the world as one country, because we are facing so many challenges. And this is the time that we need to hear you. So talk to this country, talk to Malaysia, talk to us doctors, talk to everyone. Why is it essential for us now to really put an end to war? And I will come to the 1940s when we were all in that time. But your thinking of this one world government at this point in time, as we go into the 21st century, don't spend some time with us and give us an idea of your thinking and your mind of this one world government.
What I notice is that there are many problems faced by the whole world, not just by one country or some countries, but the whole world is faced with problems which need to be tackled by a central authority. In a state, the state government can deal with problems within the state. But here we have a problem that affects not only the state, but the whole world, a common problem. One of these common problem is that we now have a very big population. The world population has reached 8 billion, and 8 billion people creates problems for governments and for themselves. For example, governments now are not as effective as they used to be. You see what is happening in France, for example. The government may want to do something, but when the people refuse and take to the streets, the government really cannot do anything. They cannot very well kill their own people. And there were riots for 5 consecutive days. There were street demonstration and riots, and the government feels unable to do anything. And this increase in the number of people creates many problems. For one thing, certainly the amount of waste they produce would be horrible. Mountains of waste already would be produced by them. Already we are having problem dealing with waste. For example, plastic waste is causing a lot of problem for us. But it's not only plastic. There are other waste that are produced by us which needs to be dealt with. What happened with plastic is that the rich countries send the plastic they have already used to the poor countries. And the poor countries now face a problem of huge amounts of waste coming from the rich countries. That means that the number of people is producing the waste, and we need to find a way to deal with the waste. So that is one thing. The other thing, of course, is, as I said just now, the governments have become ineffective, unable to govern their people, because the people now take to the streets and against the government. And there are many, many other issues, because numbers of people find that their countries are not hospitable and they have to migrate. And we see millions of people migrating from poor countries to rich countries. So obviously, the increased number of people poses many problems for the whole world. But it cannot be tackled by a country by itself. It must be tackled by the whole world. But a whole world government is not going to be concerned with crimes committed in a country, but with common problems. For example, there is now a climate change, and climate change affects the whole world. That also needs to be monitored and dealt with by the whole world, not just by one country. And on the top of that, we have recently this pandemic, a disease that affects not one country but the whole world. Again, we need to have a central authority so that people will get the necessary vaccines, for example, and not only the rich people, but the poor people also will have access to vaccines. So that is why, for certain common problems, the world needs to have a central authority. I suggested that it may be like the UN, but the UN, as you know, is controlled by 5 countries with veto powers, and they
Absolutely.
can veto everything. So we need some form of world governance that can tackle common problems affecting people throughout the world. For example, outbreaks of war. We know that war is destructive. People die by the millions, and whole countries are devastated. But it's a problem that affects all the other countries. The war between Russia and Ukraine affects us all, because now the cost of living has gone up because we can't have access to Ukraine grains, for example. So there are many things that happen in the world today that are common to every country. So for that reason, we need some central authority. I mentioned that we should have a world government, not actually a government in the sense that we have today, but an authority that can decide and be respected and obeyed by all the countries of the world.
You know, we are dealing with problems of public health. In fact, this world government, one of the issues that we can handle together is public health. Nobody has managed 8 billion people before. And we are talking about an aging population, especially in this part of the world. And as doctors, we have not even come to that. We can see the damage the pandemic did. And instead of now moving into an age of digital transformation, there's so much that we can do to be able to pick up this. And we talk about in the medical field the sandwich generation, where people are working in their 40s and 50s, having children to feed and elderly patients to look after, parents. And this is a stress on the whole of society, that when you don't offer them good public health. And in fact, now we are talking about antimicrobial resistance. And COVID was a very good example of a blind enemy. You can't see that enemy. And it doesn't respect any race, color, creed, or country. So you're right, Tun, and I want to be able to, as another visionary, that you need to bring this to this country. Malaysia can be the beacon for this one world kind of interconnected relations with different countries. You talked about climate change. In fact, Asia is got 50% of the emissions come from Asia. And we can be the beacon to start this, Tun. What are your thoughts on this? Because you talked about climate change, I'm talking about public health, we are talking about digitalization of agriculture, sharing of wealth. I mean, this is the time, don't you think?
Yes, it is. For example, let's take the speed of travel. It takes only a few hours to travel from China to Malaysia, for example. In the past, it took 3 months or even longer to travel from China to Malaysia. But when you have the speed reduced to 3 hours, the person coming into Malaysia may be carrying some disease which has not yet shown any side effects or evidence. So by the time he reaches here, he carries the disease and the disease would be spread in Malaysia. In fact, the COVID-19, the first spread was from China to Iran, because there are people who travel from China to Iran, and within hours they could travel from Wuhan to Tehran, for example, and the result would be in Tehran the disease would flare up, and the person would be spreading the disease to the people in uh, in Iran. So the speed of travel is a problem. How do we check people so that they don't carry disease from one country to another and eventually throughout the world? So this is a problem, a medical problem that needs to have some central policies and strategies that can reduce the possibility of infections spreading throughout the world as happened with COVID-19.
I was just talking to a colleague yesterday, and I was talking about your one world government. We have a scan called PET scan, and which is positive emissions tomography, where you put the patient in, the whole body goes into a chamber, and by using these radioactive tracers, we can pick up hot spots. And it's as if we should have a PET scanning of this whole world, where we can pick up hotspots like what you are saying and know from where it's coming from and where it's going, and immediately put a stop to it. With the advances of automation, nothing is impossible.
Yeah, we need to have the cooperation between all the countries of the world. because the world has shrunken. In terms of travel time, the world now is very small. It's not like before where people take months to travel, even years to travel. But now you can travel within hours from one place to another place. And this poses certain problem of controls to prevent spreads of whatever noxious diseases that is infectious.
Well, Tun, let's just put that as Malaysia's spearhead, your legacy of forming this one world government to keep everybody in check so that war becomes illegal, and we put a stop to all the killing of lives, because life is so precious, and we need to think differently and for a better future. Now, coming back to your book, Capturing Hope. As a visionary myself, you know, Tun, Michelangelo was a sculptor, and it is said that every time when he saw a piece of marble, he saw an angel in it, and he would chip and chip and chip away until that angel was free. And I want to try and bring this to you that that angel is an angel of hope. And let's come back to Malaysia. And at a time when, you know, in the 1940s, you talked about the Japanese War. You know, we have been through occupation, not in my generation, but I know my parents did. My mother used to come back from school and she would hear the siren in Batu Road, and they had to dive into trenches and protect themselves, and what they went through. And I remember my father he was an engineer, and they would all meet outside the power station and they would sing the Japanese song, which goes like this tune, Mi oto okai no sora hakate. They had to do that every day. And the interesting thing is there's a meaning to that, which I will come to in a moment if I can find it. And there's a meaning to that. And the meaning is this: Lihatlah Fajar menyising di ufuk timur. They sang this every day when they went to work in the 1945. Look at the dawn looming over the eastern horizon. This is in the 1940s. And 40 years later, 1981, you become the fourth Prime Minister of Malaysia, and you turn the vision of the country to look east. I mean, you know, history has a wonderful way of making its mark on life. Now, talk to us about that time when you were, you know, in medical university. The war did disrupt you to finishing it. Even your courting days were lengthened because of the war. Talk to us. What was it like? Because I heard my parents talk about what occupation is, and thank God, for 60 to 66 years now, we have been free of war and occupation. Did those years make a mark on your life that you're totally very vocal about war and occupation?
War is destructive. People are killed by the millions. Whole countries are devastated. And yet we, in human society, we consider killing a person as a crime, as murder. And a person who kills a person can be sentenced to death even. But when you have a war, you can kill 1 million people and you are given medals for it. You are allowed as a great leader, etc. There is something wrong with our thinking. You kill
Yeah.
one person, it's a crime. You kill 1 million, is glorious. So I think the amount of destruction, the number of death is horrendous. We should be able to avoid war. Why? If we avoid war, then the results would be the same. The results of war is that you may win or you may lose. The result of negotiation is the same. You may win or you may lose. But if the problem is dealt with by negotiation or arbitration or a court of law, then nobody is killed. No damage is done. But of course, the result may be positive or negative. But in war, you kill 1 million people, at the end of it, the result is the same. You either lose or you win, but the damage done is terrible. Millions of people being killed, whole countries devastated. So, I mean, we claim to be civilized people. How can we claim to be civilized people if we accept destruction as a means to settle problems? That is why I think the world, if you claim to be civilized, must uh, make war illegal. As much as we make murder illegal, we should make war illegal, but not in the way that we see now, where the winners set up a court to try the losers. That is not fair, not just. But we should have a neutral court that will judge, pass judgment on the claims by different countries. That way, may settle a claim, but of course, some will lose, some will win, or both will lose, or may win, depending upon the decision of the court. So
Absolutely.
I believe that if we want to claim to be civilized, we must get rid of war. We must resort to peaceful solution to conflicts between nations.
Absolutely, because we are so interconnected that the message of the 21st century is nothing like sitting down and collaborating and talking to one another than going into the battlefield to sort out our problems. And I agree with you there. And talking about Quo Vadis Malaysia, in 1957, at the birth of freedom, the angel of hope was set free. In 1963, new wings were put onto that angel of hope, hoping that with the formation of Malaysia, it will go to greater heights. Now, I want to tell you and ask you that the biggest change that you have done is the change of transition from 1981. You industrialized this country. Now, in 1981 and in December 1981, you turned the whole country and you prepared this country for industrialization, dynamism, move into an area that has never been tasted before. You brought in Malaysia Incorporated. I remember sitting for exams in the medical department to answer questions on what is the meaning of Malaysia Incorporated and what is privatization. But even so, Tun, just share with us what made you turn the country? Because there's a reason for me asking you, Tun, because when the Look East policy brought two principal twin towers of freedom to be able to be survive as a democratic country. Number one is ethics, and number two is morality, the culture of work. All of us are doctors, you and I, we know what it is to work. It's a celebration of being alive. So talk to us and talk to the nation. That turning point from an agricultural kind of base to an industrialized, was the country ready to see your vision?
Well, almost every country began with a very small population. A small population means small demands for food, for example. So, for a small population, there could be employment simply through agriculture to grow food for the people. Agriculture, however, does not create much job opportunities. And Malaysia, when we became independent, had a population of just about 5 million people. That was all right because we could employ all the people, paddy planting, fishing for fish and things like that. And everybody would have a job and would be able to sustain themselves. But when the population grew, there were no jobs, and there were no jobs means people are poor. we need to give people an opportunity to make some income for themselves. And we realized that as between agriculture and industry, it is much more possible to create jobs in industry than with agriculture. 1 acre of land for agriculture is not even sufficient for one person, but 1 acre of land for industry can give employment to 500 people. So it is a better usage of land available. So we decided in order to create more jobs, we should go from agriculture to industry. But we had no technology, we had no capital, we had no commercial know-how, and we found it difficult for us to move from agriculture to industry. What we did was we invite foreigners to come and set up industries in Malaysia. This later became known as FDI, foreign direct investment. And
Yes.
when they came, they set up industries, creating more jobs, and many of our people were able to find work in the industries, and they were able to make a living for themselves. That was why we decided that while we should sustain agriculture, we should move also into industry to give opportunities for more jobs for our people. And that strategy worked very well because today the population of Malaysia is 33 million. Obviously, they cannot be employed in all of them in agriculture or in fishing. They have to be employed in producing manufactured goods. And that is what we are doing today. In the beginning, our export was 80% agricultural products to other parts, other countries. But today, our export is made up of 80% manufactured goods. That means that our people are better employed, our people are richer, and they are able to feed themselves because they have the money to buy the food that they need.
I remember 1981 very clearly because I was a captain in the Malaysian Armed Forces. I was seconded from the Ministry of Health to the Ministry of Defense. And I was positioned in Bao in Sarawak. And at that time, communist insurgency was very much alive. And I remember being in the jungles of Sarawak in Bao with my M16 and, and feeling one word, truly Malaysian, because my colleagues were all doctors and all of us were holding M16s. And it was a great sense of patriotism that to defend the nation of Malaysia. So I remember 1981 very well when you came in to become my fourth prime minister. And there's much that we can learn. But Japan, when we talked about one world government, the ethics and the morality is what this government would need, and governance. When you're talking about governance, because pride and wealth, everyone wants wealth. But if we don't have the morality and the ethics, I think it can lead to other destructive monsters, which we now talk about, and that is poverty and corruption. So the look east, I mean, that was when you went to Japan in 1960s, right?
Yes. I went to Japan the first time in 1962. At
Uh-huh.
that time, they were still rebuilding Japan because of the destruction by the bombing of Japan by the Americans. They were rebuilding their country and they were working very hard. And very quickly, they became the number two economic power in the world. They must have been doing something right because they could so quickly recover from the destruction of the war. So I thought that we could learn from them. If we can learn from them how they recovered, Malaysia also will be able to develop and become enriched through development and give the people a better life. So we then decided we have always been looking west. We still continue to look west, but there are many things in the east that have shown good results. And if we want to achieve growth for Malaysia, we need to know also from the east. That was why we introduced the Look East policy. Then came the idea of Malaysia Incorporated. Normally, there seemed to be animosity between government and the private sector, almost as if the private sector is the enemy. But the private sector creates wealth. When they do business, they create wealth. And part of the wealth goes to the government because the government taxes corporate tax up to 40 over percent. So when a company makes money, the government can expect to have more taxes. So if the company loses, then the government gets nothing. So it is incumbent upon the government to help the company achieve success, make profits, so that part of the profit goes to the government. So when we realize that the private sector is not making money only for itself but also for the government, we decided to facilitate the industries to work together with the private sector so that they will succeed in their business and the government will earn more corporate tax. So to do that, we need to have friendly relation between government and the private sector. And that is what Malaysia Incorporated is all about.
And I'm reminded about 1996. You see the country doing very well, finance building, and then the tsunami hits. And you know, I still think of your words when you said I had to go back and study how to manage finance. I mean, that was a teaching to all of us as doctors, you know, because we neglect finance. We don't know how to look after our own finances. But the beauty about you is that you went back to the books to learn by yourself. Talk to us about those moments. I mean, that must have been a trial time for you.
Well, what I did was not just to read books on finance, but also to meet people who are familiar with financial matters, people who
Absolutely.
are in the banks, for example. That is why I asked for Nur Muhammad, who was at that time kind of deputy governor of the central bank. I wanted to know how the financial system works. And he briefed me on all the aspects of the financial system. That enabled me to choose a strategy that could save Malaysia from further depreciation of the currency. And as you know, we fixed the exchange rate, and Malaysia recovered.
Tun, I want to shift gears now as we come towards the last part of our conversation this morning, and that is on health and life. Both of us are doctors. Both of us have something in common. We are both patients. And I had open heart surgery 12 years ago. One of the greatest gifts you have given to this country is the Institute Jantung Negara, where you know I go every year to get my heart checkup, and I see the hundreds and hundreds of people there having the same problem. So that was a brilliant. And you had your open heart surgery in Malaysia, which is so commendable. That there's so much that we can learn from that, to be able to trust this nation and trust the doctors in this nation. Tun, death was knocking at the door. In fact, on the night before my operation, I wrote 3 letters to my children. They're all doctors, 3 of them. But I wrote a letter to say, in case I don't see you again. This is what you must do. I had the heart of my family on me, but you had the heart of a nation and your family. Talk to us about that moment, because our hearts were stopped. Yours was twice. And I think that in 1989 and 2007, in 1989, you were 64 years old. And in 2007, you were 82. So, we can all talk about the trials of life, but death is real. Share with us those moments.
Well, I have always believed that Malaysia can do what other people can do. So when
Absolutely.
I had this heart attack, the doctors diagnosed it as an infarction, as one of the arteries may have become blocked, and my heart was not receiving the blood that it needs in order to function. And he told me that in those days, the only treatment that they could recommend was to have open heart surgery and do a new passage for the blood. And that means opening up my chest and stopping my heart in order to do all this. Now, for ordinary people, they may not know what is going to happen, what are the process that it will be taken, and without the knowledge, they feel quite safe. But as a doctor, I know what they are going to do, and I know that it was a very dangerous procedure. At that time, when I was 60, 61 years old, 62 years old, uh, open heart surgery was not common. Certainly not common in Malaysia. And
Absolutely.
not only a few people, few doctors were qualified to do it. And when I had this diagnosis, they told me that I should go to America, to Mayo Clinic, to have my operation. I asked him, but can you do it here? I said, yes, yes, you can do it here, but you should go to America. I said, why not here? They have no answer. They said that, well, it can be done, and they don't have to talk to me about the risk, because as a doctor, I know the risk. So anyway, I decided that if I want the country to believe in our own capability, that kita boleh, then I must submit to having the operation done in Kuala Lumpur. And of course, the operation was successful. I realized, of course, that as I was going for the operation, that I may not open my eyes again, that I may die on the table, on the operation table, but that is a risk. I thought that, okay, that is something that I have to accept. Fortunately, of course, Dr. Yahya Awang uh, did a very good job together with the second well-known heart surgeon, Ghazali Watuz. He was already in the private sector, but for my operation, he came together with to work together with Yahya Awang, who was a government doctor. We had no special heart hospital at that time. I had to go to the general hospital, to the ordinary operation theater. But they did a good job. I recovered, and later on, of course, I was able to function as usual. I was very glad. But what happens after that is that Malaysians became convinced that we have the ability to perform heart surgeries. And because of that, there was a demand. And the doctors told me that they needed a hospital, a special hospital. So as I was the prime minister, I was able to persuade the cabinet that we should allocate funds for a hospital, a heart hospital, IJN, Institute Jantung Negara, the Heart Institute of Malaysia. So money was provided, and we built this institute. And today it has expanded very much. It has a huge number of patients, and people no longer worry about having open heart surgery. Although today open heart surgery is not the only choice. Today we can do other procedures which may not necessitate us opening up the chest. So progress is being made. Our people are learning. They are making use of new equipments and instruments, and heart diseases now has not become as bad as we expected as a cause of death in Malaysia. So my operation resulted in the Institute Jantung Negara being set up.
I
For
know.
that, I'm very glad, because later on, when I was 82 years old, I needed a redo to do once again a heart surgery. And I had no problem going to IJN, and they operated. And it was a little bit more complicated because I was older, but eventually I recovered. And now I am still functioning, and so far I have not been having any heart attacks.
And I want to just say thank you, because I had my open heart surgery in IGN, and I owe my life to Dr. Sri Azari Yaakob and my cardiologist, Dr. Amin. We were both, working together in the General Hospital in the 80s. So life has a way of making its turn, and you meet the people who are keeping me alive. But Tun, in the intensive care unit, I really felt a true Malaysian, because it took Dr. Azari to open up my chest. It took Dr. Amin to look after my heart. It took another Chinese thoracic surgeon to take veins from my leg. And it took an Indian anesthetist to extubate me. So we had all the three, Malaysians working on me, and this is the beauty of being in this country, where we are all here interconnected, and if we feed with one another, there's so much of wealth to share. And so, on that note, Tun, I want to read this, which is appropriate. It's a quote from George Orwell. Perhaps one did not want to be loved so much as to be understood. And this country needs to understand how much that you have given. One of the twin monsters that can come out from a wealthy country is the two-faced monster of poverty and corruption. And I believe very strongly that with the right approach and a political will, but there must be a spiritual will, because it also involves a disease of the heart, which can be very deceptive. The heart is deceitful beyond cure. So on that note, Tun, let me just end with the words from your book, Vadis, Malaysia. I am encouraged that there are Malaysians speaking out, young people who are deeply aware of their rights as well as the duties and responsibilities of political leaders towards the country. Young people are the future, and God willing, they will restore all that is right for our country. Our struggle is not finished, for only the wise and the valiant will light the beacon for a victorious people. Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. So, Tun, give us some takeaways that we can hold dear to our heart as we join the country to celebrate your 98th birthday next week. Please give us some words of encouragement.
Well, we are a democratic nation. Democracy means the people will choose their leaders, their government. But we have noticed that corruption has caused the people to choose the wrong kind of people to form the government. But people must go back to a clean slate to choose people who are not linked to corrupt practices. Please, for the love of this country, reject corruption. Thank you.